Hi everyone and welcome back to a new video on Realizations. If you've ever wondered if the Indian MBA makes more sense as a fresher right after college or with a few years of work experience, then this video is for you. There is no denying that there are pros and cons to both doing an MBA as a fresher or doing an MBA as someone with work experience. I myself know many freshers who've gone on to do very good from IIM Bangalore or from other colleges. Plus, I also know freshers who've struggled to keep pace academically as well as to find good placements. On the other hand, I also know people with work experience who've done exceptionally well. Plus, I also know people with high experience who struggled to find a placements, which means you will hear very different things about this argument depending on who you ask. So today I thought to discuss this topic of fresher versus Workex debate using my observations of interacting with hundreds of students, the students I mentor or my batchmates or my seniors, giving you data, giving you IIM specific context, talking about the myths, the trade-offs and my honest opinion. Because this is the kind of discussion I wish someone had had with me when I was thinking of these topics. So let's get started. Before we get into the pros and cons, I want you to understand that the context of the foreign MBA and the Indian MBA are supremely different from each other. Therefore, what applies to the foreign MBA does not apply to the Indian MBA. If you watch any MBA advice from USA for that example, it's very logical for people to say that MBA only makes sense after 4 to 5 years of work experience. Harvard, Stanford, LBS, all of them have an average Workex of roughly 4.5 to 5 years of the cohort. So Workex there is not a suggestion, it's the minimum viable profile that you need to have. But in India, the context is completely different. Let's take IIM Ahmedabad for that example. 29% of the batch is freshers. IIM Calcutta, 40% of the batch is freshers. There are certain newer IIMs where the percentage of freshers is as high as 50 to 60%. Some college even has 78% of freshers. So bear in mind that in this video, I'm only talking about the Indian flagship MBA program. And I'll tell you why this matters. Because the companies that come to recruit in these IIMs, they are aware that anywhere between 30 to 50% of the batch is either fresher or with just 1 to 2 years of experience. So they come with those kind of roles. That's the whole model. So when someone tells you that work for a few years and then go for an MBA because you'll get better roles, the answer to that is yes and no. Before we come to the pros and cons of both doing an MBA as a fresher and doing an MBA with Workex, I wanted to address a few myths that I've heard about this discussion. The first myth is that you need to have work experience to get into an IIM. And that's certainly not true because I just told you that 30% of IIM Ahmedabad, 40% of IIM Calcutta is freshers. So how are they getting in if you just need Workex to make into such IIMs? No single IIM out of the 21 IIMs has a mandatory work experience policy. Is work experience helpful in getting into a good B school? Certainly, because most B schools have certain weightage for the Workex in the composite score and it helps. But that does not mean that freshers do not make it to IIMs. The only anomaly worth discussing here is IIM Bangalore because they give as much as 10% weightage to work experience greater than 36 months and they only have 15% freshers, which is the lowest among all IIM. The next myth is that if you have 2 to 3 years of work experience, you will get higher pay in an IIM. And the data here will shock you because that is not true. Freshers and candidates with up to 2 years of experience are almost at par when it comes to the CTC they get. Yes, the salary difference is negligible because the IIM placement system does not necessarily reward you for coming up with that additional 1 to 2 years of Workex. The premium only kicks in for 3 to 4 years of relevant industry specific work experience. So if you're recruiting for a consulting firm, they only take into account if you have previous consulting experience, or if you are recruiting for a product management or a technical firm, they only take into account 3 to 4 years of Workex in the same exact field, which is rare and not every student has that. And even in this case, it's only accessible through lateral placements, which is a completely different thing that we'll discuss further ahead in the video. Myth 3 is that companies prefer students with higher experience in the campus placements. And no, that's not something that can be said as a blanket statement. There are different types of companies which prefer freshers. There are certain types of companies which are neutral, and there are certain companies that prefer people with work experience. So it's a mixed game. So FMCG companies like HUL, P&G, sales marketing roles, they prefer freshers because there's a lot of travel involved. Plus they are hiring for their internal leadership development roles and they don't want to take someone in their mid-career and then train them. They want absolute fresh brain. The big consulting firms, the MBBs, the Strategy and Accenture, these kind of companies, they are completely neutral. They do not care if you're a fresher or someone with work experience. Finance firms and product management roles, they do prefer someone with relevant work experience, but again, this is not mandatory. So saying that companies prefer Workex is completely an overgeneralization. Now let's discuss the pros and cons of being a fresher and doing an MBA, and then we move on to the pros and cons of being someone with work experience and doing an MBA. So the biggest pro of doing an MBA as a fresher is that you start your career clock much early and with a much higher starting pay. This is something that people usually miss and do not quantify, but it is very important. Let's say you crack CAT at the age of 21, 22, you get into the college, and at 23, 24, you have started making a huge pay, something in the range of 24 to 30 LPA. Compared to that, there is a batchmate of yours who decides to work 2 to 3 years before doing an MBA, and they start doing an MBA at around 24, 25, and for them to reach the kind of pay, it'll be like age 27, 28, which means for the last 2 to 3 years, this person who had started as a fresher is already earning much more. Even if this person who decides to do an MBA 3 years after their Workex was earning before, but I'm sure that the starting pay that they had would definitely be lower than the MBA starting pay, and that is why they moved on to do an MBA. So the fresher year had a higher starting pay, plus they will be working in the post MBA role much longer, and therefore this fresher can reach the same kind of roles but at a much lower age. The second pro of doing an MBA as a fresher is that the academic momentum is real. You're just out of college, so you're still in the study mode. You have CAT preparation is generally easier because you don't have to stress about work or anything. The only thing that you have to manage is maybe college and exams. The next pro of doing an MBA as a fresher is that FMCG companies and sales and marketing roles, they prefer freshers. So if you are someone who is sure that they want to get into such roles, then it makes a lot of sense for you to do an MBA as a fresher, because such companies actively recruit freshers, and this is not a myth or not something that just goes around. It's more or less truth. The next pro is that freshers do not have the opportunity cost of leaving a job mid-career. Freshers haven't started their career trajectory yet, so they do not have the opportunity cost of giving up a career in which they were growing, or there were chances of promotion or a pay hike, or the feeling that you have spent 2 to 3 years into something and now you have to just let it go and start something completely from scratch. And the worst part is that you're not even sure if this pre-MBA work experience that you spent 2 to 3 years on will even be counted or not. So yes, this transition is much easier for freshers. Now, coming to the cons of doing an MBA as a fresher. And the first one is that why MBA question for freshers is genuinely hard question if you haven't already worked. And this usually comes up in most interviews for freshers because they do not have a backstory to explain that, okay, I was working and then I saw something that I could learn more or to understand business context more, and that is why I want to do an MBA. They are a blank slate. They cannot just honestly say this blank answer that this seemed like the logical step or I wanted to start earning more. So explaining why MBA is a little tougher for freshers and not that straightforward. The next con of doing an MBA as a fresher is that sometimes class participation and understanding certain academic concepts can be a little harder without experience and without context of the industry. So the IM case study methodology depends highly on case studies. For example, if you're studying marketing, you would have a case study on marketing. If you're studying operations or supply chain, you would go through a supply chain case study. And if you've never seen any working environment, these things could be a little difficult for you to comprehend. I'm not saying that it's very difficult or it's impossible. A lot of freshers, they excel in academics. Even if though they do not have real experience, they are very good academically because they know how to study, they know how to fetch marks. So this is not really a fatal problem. This is just a slight disadvantage which can be worked upon on. And the third and final con of doing an MBA as a fresher is that you do not get to sit for lateral placements, because lateral placements are only open for people with 18 to 24 months of work experience. I'll explain lateral placements in detail when we move on to people with work experience. Okay, so now let's discuss the pros and cons of doing an MBA with work experience. And let's start with the pros. So the first pro is that lateral placements are exclusively for them. Now, what are lateral placements? So how IM placements work is that it's done in 2 stages in the final year. The first is the lateral placement process and the second is the final placement process. The lateral placements are only open for people with 18 or 24 months of work experience. Every year that changes depending on the college, depending on the batch. And recruiting companies in this round offer mid-level roles. They are not absolute starting roles. That could be the case in the final placements. And yes, the starting pay here could be 10 to 20% higher. This is the only formal mechanism where IIMs reward students with 2 to 3 to 4 years of work experience with actually differentiated outcomes. The second pro of doing an MBA with work experience is that your why MBA answer or your interview performance could be better because you have a lot of things to speak about. And this is because you can build a story. The why MBA answer could be genuine. It could touch your past, your present, and your future. Why you want to move to a broader role, or why you want to learn business, because you saw certain things and you actually saw by experience. You can talk about that gap and how MBA will help you fill that gap. And here I'm not saying that people with work experience are smarter. All I'm saying is that they have more material to work on. They have more material to talk about. The next pro is that so people with work experience bring their experience into class discussions, simulations, group projects, and a lot of people in the batch, including freshers, get to learn a lot from the experience that these folks bring in. And another pro of doing an MBA with work experience is that IIM Bangalore becomes slightly more accessible because, like I was explaining, there is 10% weightage for people with work experience, which means it gets slightly easier if you have 36 months of Workex or more, because at 36 you get the maximum full score for work experience. Coming to the cons of doing an MBA with work experience. And the first is that there is a huge opportunity cost. Here is the actual math, and I've seen this happen to myself. Let's take two batchmates who graduate at the same time. One decides to do an MBA as a fresher and the other decides to work 2 to 3 years and then do an MBA. This fresher goes to a top tier B school directly and after 2 years starts earning upwards of 25 to 30 lakhs. Whereas this other person was earning anywhere between 10 to 12 lakhs and worked for 3 years in this role. And after these 3 years, this person decides to do an MBA. While this friend now is absolutely starting a fresh career post MBA, and it's not even guaranteed that their pre-MBA work experience would be considered or not. Now coming to the second point, which I've slightly touched in the introduction as well, that most companies coming to IIMs for recruitment, they are aware of the distribution of the batch, that there are huge number of freshers and therefore the kind of roles are more or less entry level of analyst or management trainee. And no, this is not a criticism, this is by design. The average batch is young with average experience as at 1.5 or 2 years max. So even if you show up with 4 to 5 years of work experience, you are still competing for the same roles. And that is why that 2 to 3 years or sometimes even 4 to 5 years of pre-MBA work experience sometimes feels like a loss if you are doing the same job that a fresher is doing. The third con of doing an MBA with work experience is that CAT preparation is extremely tough with a demanding job. And not all of us can do that. What if you have a lot of travel involved? What if the work pressure is a lot? What if there is toxicity at work? And even though you want to really prepare for CAT, but your circumstances do not allow you to. I know a big chunk of people still prepare along with all of these problems, but all I'm saying is that it requires much more discipline and much more sacrifice. And the final con is that beyond 3 years of work experience, the admission advantage that you get, it plateaus. Yeah, so if you have more than 36 months of work experience, you do not get any additional point for that work experience. It's just the fact that you are older now with very high work experience. Okay, so here's my honest take after everything that we have discussed so far. If you get a top tier B school as a fresher, take it. No questions asked, no second guessing. The salary data validates it completely. There is no pay difference between someone doing an MBA as a fresher or someone with under 2 years of work experience. Like I mentioned, the only time that this work experience is beneficial or it turns up into pay difference is when you have 3 to 4 years of genuine, relevant work experience, industry specific work experience. And it shows up in the lateral placements. Example, BFSI to finance sector roles or tech to product management switch. These are the only few times and these are very narrow scenarios and does not play out for everyone. And just the thinking that I'll work first and then save first and then go for an MBA, like I just explained you are better off doing an MBA first and getting into the corporate world with higher pay than working at a lower salary and saving up and then doing an MBA later. The only times where going for an MBA after Workex makes sense is if you are targeting very specific roles which require pre-experience, or if you really want to get into IIM Bangalore and you need the Workex points. But if you're someone for whom both these options are open and you're still wondering if you should do an MBA as a fresher or get some work experience first, in that case, doing an MBA as a fresher in the Indian ecosystem makes more sense. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? And let's have a discussion. These were all my points, my experiences, what I have seen around me. Or maybe this is coming from a biased place because I went in with approximately 2 years of work experience and I saw no difference between the kind of opportunities that I got versus what freshers got. And it's completely all right if you don't agree with my take. Let's have a discussion in the comments and see you in the next one. Till then, like, comment, share, subscribe, give me new video ideas in the comments, and all the best. See you in the next one. Bye bye.